They told me I was chosen, not because I was the smartest, not because I came from a loyal family, but because I smiled the way they liked. They brought me into a world with silk curtains, gold-rimmed plates, and soft piano music floating through marble halls. I wore dresses I'd never touched before, drank tea I couldn't pronounce, and bowed to people whose names I was never allowed to speak aloud. They said I was one of the lucky ones, one of the girls, the ones who serve, who entertain, who disappear. Every room had no corners. Every mirror could see through me. Every compliment was a test, and silence was the only thing that kept us alive. The other girls told me never to cry, but I remember the first time one of them didn't return after a visit upstairs. Her bed was made by morning. Her name was never spoken again. They gave us perfume, pearls, even promises, but they never told us what happened after. Now I know. Now, I remember everything. And this is the part they never wanted anyone to hear. My name doesn't matter now. The one they gave me when I joined the unit wasn't mine anyway. It was cleaner, softer, easier to remember, something that could fit neatly on a document or be whispered in passing by men who never had to ask permission. I was 16 when they selected me. A schoolgirl from a border province, daughter of a minor party official, who once delivered a gift basket to a vice minister and never stopped reminding people of it. I wasn't remarkable, just obedient. I studied well, sang in patriotic choirs, walked with my eyes slightly downcast. The day they came, I thought I was in trouble. 2 women in pale uniforms arrived during lunch and asked my teacher to call me out. They didn't smile. They didn't explain. They simply said I had been invited to Pyongyang for elite service consideration. That night, my mother wept quietly behind the kitchen door, thinking I'd been chosen for a youth exchange program. My father didn't speak at all. The capital was everything we had only seen in murals. Clean, bright, and humming with invisible power. They drove me past gates, guarded by men who didn't blink, into a compound with white walls and blue-tiled roofs. Inside, there were no loud voices, no dust, no mistakes. My room was bigger than our whole apartment back home. There were 2 sets of sheets, slippers placed exactly parallel to each other, and a small framed picture of magnolias, just like the ones in propaganda posters about the Supreme Leader's mother. There was no television, no phone, but the faucet gave hot water, and the floor was always warm. In the first week, they taught us how to walk without making sound. In the second, we learned to sit with our backs perfectly straight for hours without shifting. By the third, we were tested on how quickly we could change facial expressions. Smile, surprise, delight, adoration, all on cue. The instructors never said the words "hangbokjo," but we heard it late at night, whispered from bed to bed, after the lights went out, and the hallway sensors clicked. The happiness squad, they called it. Though none of us knew what happiness really meant, they told us we were being prepared to serve the highest men in the country, that this was a great honor, a patriotic role, that girls who succeeded often had families who rose quickly through the ranks. I believed them, or at least, I tried to. Because what else was I supposed to believe? In a place where every truth was taught, and every lie could cost you everything. At first, it almost felt like a dream. Every morning began with soft chimes and sunlight filtered through embroidered curtains. We were woken not by whistles or shouts, but by the scent of warm rice and seaweed soup carried through the vents. Each of us had our own room, our own mirror, our own neatly folded uniform, gray and white, with a single crimson ribbon. There were lessons, of course, hours of walking, speaking, dancing, even how to look directly at someone without challenging them. But between the routines, there were moments that felt strangely peaceful. We had hot water any time we needed. There was meat in our soup at least twice a week. On Sundays, we were allowed to listen to music instrumentals only, played through ceiling speakers from a hidden control room. We laughed sometimes, quietly, carefully, but laughter nonetheless. A girl named Sook would mimic the way one instructor furrowed her brow while correcting posture, and we'd bury our faces in pillows to keep from being heard. There were gardens, too, perfectly manicured, with stone lanterns and small koi ponds. Sometimes we'd be told to rest outside for an hour, a break that felt suspiciously like a test. I remember once sitting too long on a bench and being told later my spine had looked dull. But even paradise, when watched too closely, begins to fray. None of the doors had locks from the inside. The windows were reinforced. The walls were thick. Yet sometimes we could hear footsteps that didn't belong to us. Cameras were everywhere, disguised as light fixtures, smoke detectors, even inside the flower vases. We were told not to ask questions. We were told not to speak names aloud, neither ours nor anyone else's. We were told that service was honor, and honor meant silence. Once, a girl returned from an appointment with a man they didn't name. Her lipstick had smudged slightly. Her eyes were dry. She lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling for 3 days. No one said a word. When the nurse finally came to check on her, she simply whispered. I smiled the whole time. And then, she was gone the next morning. Her room emptied, sheets folded, name erased. After that, the smiles we practiced felt heavier, the silence more permanent. But we still followed the schedule, because no one wanted to be the next girl whose door stopped opening. The night everything changed. I wasn't scheduled for service. I was supposed to be in etiquette review, practicing tea pouring in silence. But at 7:46 p.m., a woman in heels I'd never seen before entered the room and said my name. Not the name I was born with, but the one they gave me. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. I followed. The hallway smelled different that night, like jasmine oil and bleach. We passed a room with the lights off, and I caught a glimpse of something red on the floor. I turned my head, but the woman placed a hand on my back and gently pushed me forward. They dressed me in a gown I had never worn before. It was white, long, tight around the waist, with a slit that made me feel exposed. My hair was brushed so hard my scalp burned. My lips were painted the color of blood. Then I was brought into a room I had only ever cleaned before, the one they called the upper chamber. He was already there. He didn't look like a monster. He didn't bark orders. He smiled, offered me a sweet drink, told me I looked perfectly obedient. He asked about my training, about my voice, about how loyal I felt. I answered everything exactly as I'd been taught. Then, he touched my shoulder, then my neck. Then he whispered, "You'll learn how to make men feel invincible." After that, things happened. Things I don't say aloud. I smiled. I obeyed. Because that's what we were told to do. Because to resist is to disappear. But something inside me cracked that night. Not like glass shattering, more like a line splitting down the center, quiet and deep. When I returned to my room, everything was just as I'd left it. Except the photo frame of magnolias had fallen. And the glass had shattered. 2 days later, a girl named Yuna, who had always braided my hair for me, was summoned in the middle of the night. She hadn't yet turned 17. She was the gentlest among us, always humming to herself while folding her clothes. When they called her, she hesitated, asked if she could finish her letter to her grandmother. That was the last time I saw her. The next morning, her belongings were gone. Her drawer emptied, her toothbrush missing. On her pillow, someone had left a single strand of her braid. I went to the instructor and asked quietly where she had gone. The woman stared at me for a long time, then said only this, "You'll braid your own hair from now on." That was the moment it changed. The moment the obedience in me started to rot. The moment I stopped believing they would ever let us leave alive. I stopped smiling in the mirror. I stopped eating the meat in my soup. And I started watching the guards, not their faces, but their schedules. Because, for the first time, I wasn't waiting to serve. I was waiting to survive. I had memorized every step of the plan, not because I trusted it, but because I knew there would be no second chance. Juan had drawn the map by hand, faded pencil lines on cheap paper tucked inside a volume of revolutionary poetry. The route began beneath the compound, a maintenance tunnel, a drainage grate, a ditch behind the kitchens. Then the forest, then the river. But the map ended at the water's edge. He'd written only one thing beyond it: survive, then keep going. Mireille and I left under the cover of rain. I wore a nurse's coat stolen from the laundry room, and she carried a trash bin to mimic night cleanup duty. We timed our exit to the shift change, moving with practiced stillness through shadowed corridors. At the rear loading dock, Juan was waiting. He didn't speak, just handed me a key and a forged ID tucked into a sanitary mask. Then he turned and walked away like we never existed. The escape route stank of rot and rust. Mireille slipped in the grease of the chute, bruising her leg, but didn't complain. We crawled through darkness until we emerged in the trees. Then we ran. Rain masked our footprints, but we could still hear barking. Flashlights flashed behind us like lightning. At one point, Mireille fell, blood trailing down her shin. She shoved the pack at me and whispered, "Don't stop. Don't you dare." I tried to lift her. She screamed, "If they catch us, they'll use us for training." That was the last thing she said. I ran with her, pack clutched to my chest. Through thorns, through mud, through darkness so thick it felt like drowning. When I reached the river, deep, wide, with no banks in sight, I didn't hesitate. I stripped off my coat, tied the ID around my arm, and stepped into the freezing current. Each stroke burned. Each breath cut my throat. But stopping was not an option. I don't remember passing out, only the cold. And then, a roof. When I woke, I was in a small wooden hut. A Chinese peasant woman hovered over me, muttering words I couldn't understand. She fed me rice and boiled water. I tried to speak, but my voice was gone. For a week, I stayed hidden. She warned me not to open the window. "You're worth money," she said, tapping the side of her head. "Too much money." Eventually, she led me to a man who worked with underground Christian churches. They arranged false clothes, a new route through Kunming, then into Laos. I was hidden inside delivery trucks, chicken cages, even once beneath sacks of rice. I didn't speak for days. I didn't sleep more than an hour at a time. Every checkpoint could mean repatriation. Every silence could be betrayal. In Laos, I crossed another river. And in Thailand, I walked into a police station and whispered, "I'm from the north. Please, don't send me back." The officers didn't speak my language, but they saw the fear. They gave me food, a bed, then interviews, then papers. Months later, I boarded a plane with 7 others. We didn't speak. When the plane touched down in Seoul, someone said, "You made it." But I didn't feel like I had. Not yet. Because crossing the final border wasn't about fences. It was about learning how to live with everything I'd lost. The first thing that shocked me wasn't the lights. It was the noise. So many colors, so many sounds, cars humming like bees, advertisements flashing from screens bigger than billboards back home, voices shouting not out of anger but excitement. When they told me I was in South Korea, I didn't believe them. Not because it seemed too beautiful, but because it felt impossible. The hospital room was white and quiet. The sheets smelled like lemon and something else I couldn't name. Every surface was clean, not fake clean, like the marble floors of the compound, but lived-in clean, where someone had touched and cared. A nurse came in. She smiled. I flinched. Not out of fear of punishment, but because I had forgotten what a smile without intention looked like. She asked me if I wanted more rice. I cried. Later, at Hanawon, the resettlement center, they told me it was normal. That escapees often cried over the smallest things. Toast, flushing toilets, warm socks. For me, it was electricity. Lights that stayed on through the night. Lights you could turn off, or not. We were given clothes. Not uniforms, just regular jeans and t-shirts. Mine was blue with a small flower stitched near the collar. I stared at that flower for a long time. It felt like the first thing I had ever owned that wasn't assigned to me. They gave us phones. The first time I touched a smartphone, I didn't know where to begin. Someone showed me how to open the camera app. When I saw my own face, without makeup, without posing, I didn't recognize it. We learned about money, subway systems, voting, how to rent apartments, but the hardest lesson wasn't practical. It was trust. In North Korea, survival meant silence. Here, people asked questions, listened, offered help without expecting obedience. At first, I suspected everything. A man at the bus stop asked if I needed directions. I clutched my bag tighter. A woman offered me a discount at a clothing store. I wondered if it was a trick. Even when the counselor at Hanwon praised my progress, I looked for hidden cameras. But slowly, something shifted. I remember the first time I ordered food online. I chose something called jjajangmyeon because it reminded me of home. When the delivery man arrived, he bowed. He bowed to me. That night, I sat by the window in my small apartment. A real window. One that opened. I looked out at the neon city, the glowing streets, the couples laughing on sidewalks, and for a moment, I let myself breathe like a human being. I was still scared, still broken, still waking up sometimes thinking the walls were listening, but I was alive. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I owed that life to anyone but myself. At Hanwon, they taught us a word, freedom. But no one tells you that freedom isn't quiet. It's loud, bright, uncomfortable, and slowly, it becomes yours. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see her, Mireille, standing in the rain, mud up to her knees, telling me to run, not begging, not crying, commanding, and I ran, and I lived. But living is not the same as forgetting. In South Korea, people celebrate birthdays, take selfies with their dogs, complain about traffic. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at their joy. Sometimes I flinch at it, because my smile was once a weapon, a performance, a survival tactic. Now, it's mine, but it still feels strange. There are days when I sit in a cafe, sipping tea I chose, wearing clothes I bought with money I earned, and wonder if any of it is real. If the girl who once bowed in silence, who painted her lips red and waited outside sealed doors, was ever really me. I carry her with me. I carry all of them. Yuna, who never finished her letter. Mireille, whose blood soaked into my hands. The girl with the lipstick smudge who was gone by morning. The ones whose names I never learned, but whose eyes followed me down every corridor. They don't get to tell their story, but I do. Not because I'm brave, not because I'm special, but because I survived. And because I survived, I must speak. The world often asks, why didn't you leave sooner? Why did you stay? Why didn't you fight? They don't understand. Inside that world, choice was a myth, freedom was a rumor, and hope was a dangerous thing you kept buried behind your tongue. But here, I can speak. I can open a window. I can laugh without asking permission. And yet, there's not a single day I don't feel the cost of this freedom. It took pieces of me I'll never get back. It buried people I loved. It taught me how precious, how brutal, how alive freedom really is. So if you're hearing this, and you think it's just a sad story with a happy ending, you're wrong. It's not a happy ending. It's a beginning, because now I know who I am, not what they called me, not what they trained me to be, not a tool, not a shadow. I am a survivor, and for the first time in my life, I belong to no one.